Hello and welcome to the Backfield. I'm your host, Connor Schaff, and welcome to another episode of Methodology Monday. Once again, very late on a Monday, just because that's how my schedule works out, so deal with it. I'm sure you're watching this the next day anyway, so it is what it is. But the name is catchy, so we have to run with it. Today, we are looking at a 14-team college football playoff, and things are really getting real now, because now that we actually have the college football playoff rankings, we can really make a firm simulation of what the college football playoff bracket would look like in these formats. And what I think is so interesting about the 14-team format is all of a sudden it seems like that's the format we will likely be going to next year. Now, in this video, I want to preface this by saying I'm not going to talk too much about the playoff rankings. You can go watch the video I uploaded earlier today about that. I went on a huge rant about all of that, and we're going to focus more on what the format would look like and why it would be good for the sport and what some of the negatives would be as well. But let's go ahead and get right into it. So we're going to start off with looking at some info from an article written by On3, a major college football news network. And they wrote an article yesterday about why we should go with a 14-team format. And they gave a very interesting format to go with. It's not the format I went with, but they pretty much followed the old Big Ten basketball conference tournament format. It was very interesting to look at. I'd recommend going to check that out on their website, but we're going to go with something a bit more standard today, but I do want to go over their reasoning for why they believe in a 14-team format. So it says 14 teams is the perfect compromise between the fans who want opportunity and the conferences who want revenue, prestige, and protected advantages. It keeps stakes on conference championship weekend sky high, protects the top two conferences at the sport's financial engine, preserves incentives for elite non-conference scheduling, and still gives us playoffs that feel earned, not automated. So let's take a look at the format we'll actually be using, and that is what I like to call the 3-3-5-1-2 model. I know very, very, very creative, but this is a format I came up with, not took from the internet, and I just think it has the best balance of benefiting the top two conferences versus the rest. So I think it's a format that the conferences will end up heavily considering. Now, who knows what they'll end up going with, but I find this to be something that is pretty likely. So we'll start with that the SEC and Big Ten each get 3 automatic guaranteed qualifiers. Then the ACC, Big 12, and Notre Dame split 5 automatic qualifiers. So Notre Dame is bunched with the ACC and Big 12. The reasoning for this is to move to a new format. Apparently, what we've heard, and it's basically been confirmed at this point, is that as of next year, in a 12-team playoff, if Notre Dame finished in the top 12, they'd be guaranteed to make the playoffs. Now, if you want to hear my thoughts on that, once again, go back to my last video. Not a big fan of that, but to keep Notre Dame happy, I think that you would have to include in these 5 spots the ACC, Big 12, and Notre Dame. And really, the only 2 guaranteed spots out of that are that the ACC and Big 12 will each get 1. So technically, the Big 12 could get 4 spots, and the ACC could get 1 spot, being their conference champion only. But I think that gives the best options for these lesser conferences in our modern game to still get the opportunity for a similar amount of spots in the playoffs to the Big 2 conferences. Then, obviously, we have 1 automatic qualifier from the group of 6. That's not changing. We have 2 at-large bids, and 2 more notes is that the SEC and Big Ten champions will always get the first round bye. So even if, let's say this year that Texas Tech was ranked ahead of Georgia, Georgia would still get that first round bye. I think that's a major thing to reward these 2 mega conferences, and I think that will be something that will be present in any 14-team playoff format that we end up doing. And then we have the Big 12, the Big 12 and the ACC champs automatically qualify as well. So the top 5 conference champions will still automatically qualify like now, but it's guaranteed that the 4 Power 4 conference champions will make it in, which is different than what we have now, which is what led James Madison to make the playoffs instead of Duke. But I imagine the next format, that the Power 4 commissioners did not like that happened and will move to something more like this. So we now have this nice little bracket here. So let's start filling it in, starting with our Big Ten champ in Indiana and our SEC champ in Georgia. So they take our top 2 seeds. So obviously, even though Ohio State is ranked ahead of Georgia, Georgia will move into that 2nd seed and get the first round bye. Then we fill in with our other 2 Power 4 conference champions. So Texas Tech gets in, and then Duke does get into these playoffs. Now, I know that nobody wants Duke to be in the playoffs, but in a I would be shocked if the next format we move to doesn't guarantee all 4 Power 4 champion spots in the playoffs. So I'd be very surprised to not see Duke guaranteed a spot in the playoffs, or whoever the ACC champion would be in the future. And hopefully the ACC will fix their tie-breaking rules for us to get there. And then obviously Tulane will make it as the group of 5 seed. Tulane is ranked ahead of Duke, so they will be ranked ahead there as well. Then we have 2 more Big Ten teams guaranteed to get in. So we have Ohio State and Oregon guaranteed to get in. And then for the SEC, we have Ole Miss and Texas A&M guaranteed to get in. So between these 2 conferences, they are guaranteed 6 spots, while the ACC and Big 12 are only guaranteed 4 spots, obviously knowing that Notre Dame is included with them as well. So I have 3 more spots to give out for the ACC, Big 12, and Notre Dame. That'd be Miami getting the 10 seed, Notre Dame getting in as the 11 seed, and BYU getting in as the 12 seed. And honestly, like, if we could somehow move to this format this year, it solves so many of our problems, because every single team that we're talking about that deserves to be in, maybe besides Texas, gets in this format. Really, the big controversy is about Notre Dame and BYU not getting in, and both Notre Dame and BYU get in this format. And they not only get in through the committee's rankings, they get in because of their conference affiliation. And I think that is something that it's going to be really heavily moved towards in the next format, to try and move away from such a heavy reliance on the committee rankings. Then we have our 2 at-large teams, which leaves us with our 8th ranked team in the country, Oklahoma, and our 9th ranked team in the country, Alabama. So the SEC still gets their 5 teams in the playoffs, but they can't get any more than 5, which I think is a big deal to conferences like the ACC and the Big 12, to not let the SEC and Big 10 get so many teams into the playoffs. So we'll now go through the first 4 teams that missed out, that being Texas, Vanderbilt, Utah, and USC. And I don't really think that, obviously, Texas and Vanderbilt, I think, will be very unhappy to not make a 14-team playoff still. And we can talk about all we want about their arguments being correct. I think that Texas has a much better case than Vanderbilt. But I think that this is something that people would be much more content with than what we had with the 12-team playoff this year. So now I'll quickly go through and predict the bracket. I'm really not going to worry too much about the later rounds, because I'll end up doing a video predicting the college football playoffs, but we'll focus on these first round matchups because we only have 2 matchups still standing from our first round in our 12-team bracket and this 14-team bracket. So we have 4 new matchups created, and a couple of them are pretty interesting. So we have Oklahoma versus Alabama still in, Texas A&M versus Miami, but we now get Texas Tech versus Tulane, Ohio State versus Duke, Ole Miss versus Notre Dame, and Oregon versus BYU. And I think really obviously, Ohio State versus Duke would be a wash. Texas Tech versus Tulane would be a wash, but Oregon, BYU, and Ole Miss versus Notre Dame gives us 2 more matchups that actually have some interesting stakes to them, when we pretty much only have 2 first-round matchups in this year's bracket that actually mean anything, because you would expect Oregon and Ole Miss to destroy the group of 5 opponents they play. But so we'll go through and predict this first round. I think Oklahoma would beat Alabama, Texas Tech would beat Tulane, Oregon would beat BYU, Texas A&M would beat Georgia, Oklahoma or Ohio State would beat Duke, and Notre Dame would beat Ole Miss. Then we would have Indiana beating Oklahoma in the second round, Texas Tech beating Oregon in the second round. This is just something I've stood by the entire year, that Texas Tech would win in that matchup. Then we have Texas A&M beating Georgia. Call me biased, I don't care. And then Ohio State beating Notre Dame. Then we have Indiana beating Texas Tech, Ohio State beating Texas A&M, and then Ohio State being the national champions. So just a note about this format is that the teams in the first round that are the higher seeds would all get home games. I would imagine that in this format, the quarterfinal games would still be bowl games. I hope that they change that to make them all make home games for the second round matchups too, but I doubt it'll happen. So, yeah. But let's talk about the pros and the cons with this format. So some of the pros are that it removes some of the committee's power. I think this is going to be a must of any new format after all the issues we've had with the committee this year. It also gets some guaranteed Big 12 and ACC representation into the format that we don't already have. It guarantees that each of their conference champions make the playoffs, which I think will be very important for the future of the sport. And then it also doesn't allow over-representation from the Big Two conferences. In our 16-team format, 7 teams from the SEC or Big Ten can make it. And in our 2014 bracket, I want to say that 9 teams from one conference could make it. So this caps it at 5. 5 teams from one conference can make it, no more. And I think that that's a much better number, just to not have over-representation from one conference. And then the cons, I wish that every team got at least one home game. When I mean every team, I mean every higher-ranked team. So every team 1 through 8, which means that I wish that Indiana and Georgia also got a home game. So I think if they did make it so that the second-round games are also home games, that would solve this issue. But I don't think that would be how it works. Another one is that Notre Dame gets too much benefit of the doubt in this format. I think it's definitely what would happen, that Notre Dame gets the opportunity for a guaranteed spot compared to only at-large bids. But I think that I still just don't like the fact that Notre Dame gets that benefit of the doubt. Just tell them to join a conference. And then it rewards the conference even if they have a poor season. So the ACC this year still gets 2 spots in the playoffs, even though they were arguably worse than the American Conference this year. So I think that that's definitely an issue, but I don't think it's a massive, massive problem. So now adding to the tally, we now have 4 teams or 4 different formats on the list. And I think that the 14-team format will rise to the top. I think it's the format that the NCAA will end up going with. And I don't think it's the best format that we could possibly go with, but I think it will do the job. So with that being said, make sure to let me know your thoughts down below. Make sure to let me know your opinion on this format, on the games we would have in it, and what your 14-team format would look like. But I think that this is a pretty good what am I saying? I think it's a pretty good conglomerate idea of what would happen in a 14-team format, but definitely let me know if you have some other ideas in the comment down below. Make sure to let me know as well if there are any other formats you want me to take a look at, and I'd be open to doing them. I got suggested the 18-team format, so that's the format we will likely be doing next week. I promise eventually we'll do the 32-team and 64-team brackets, as I know that that's probably the ones that people are excited for. But with all that being said, make sure to like and subscribe, interact with the video in any way you can, because it all helps grow the channel. I will see you guys next time, so have a good one.